you look on the internet, you'll notice there's almost nothing on this topic. Hello, I'm Michael, and I play Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Technically. I've been in the system for around 2 years, and I've yet to read the entirety of the book from beginning to end. Now, hold on. Doesn't mean I don't understand the mechanics of the game. I came to Pathfinder with a very different perspective than I think most people come to a new system. I came as a designer. Like many other Pathfinder creators, I first came from Dungeons & Dragons, and I've played Dungeons & Dragons for many years, sporadically throughout my life, as a game master, but more often a player and a content creator. For the years I played Dungeons & Dragons, I created homebrew content for our home games alongside my brother. And when the OGL crisis happened, we decided to jump ship to another system, jump ship along our fully homebrew, 9-person party game. Pathfinder 2nd Edition had the most publicity around it, and some well-timed video releases from creators like NoNat1 sold us on the system. However, we were left with the issue of translating a world with a new mechanic systems, ancestries, equipment, and the blossoming signs of a new class to an entirely new tabletop role-playing game that would require basically redesigning everything from the ground up. Rather than be tactical and start from scratch, we wanted to continue the momentum and not lose the essence of this budding world, and all the other things we said to convince ourselves this was a good idea. So we gave ourselves a couple months, taking a hiatus from the campaign, to learn the new system and transcribe everything to this new system without losing any of the flavor. The scope of this project was much wider than we could have guessed. Now, I've never read the player core from page 1 to page whichever one's the last one, but I have read every class, every ancestry, most of the archetypes, and random bits and pieces from all over the different books, adventure modules, and Battlezoo homebrew. I've made playing cards for new players that cover everything the person needs to know about their character, standard rules, conditions, and actions. I have engrossed myself in the Pathfinder 2nd Edition system, and I am constantly learning and listening to every piece of content I can get my hands on from the likes of Knights of the Last Call, Swing Ripper, 1DM, The Rules Lawyer, No Nat Ones, Geared Up, Bad Luck Gamer, King Ooga Tun Tun, and Black Dragon Gaming. And I highly recommend watching these channels if you have the chance. All of that is to say, I have an unconventional understanding of the Pathfinder 2nd Edition system. I know way too much about random niche topics, way too little about others, and I'm always learning as much as I can. Actively, while writing the script, I'm listening to a Rules Lawyer video, which, of course, now I'm not listening to because that'd be distracting. Oh. Okay. Getting into the introduction, I just want to say that first, you do not need to homebrew in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I'd go further to say that if you don't know everything that is in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you should not homebrew for the game. As said by James Griffin, talking about the importance of balance in an article, your first thought when you crack open a brand new game with your friends shouldn't be, how can I get this system to do X? Spend some time with the game. Use the rules and the officially published content to play the game. Don't reinvent the wheel before you get into the driver's seat. Now, the rest of this video is because regardless of that being true, I do not want to deter homebrew for the game. I think everyone who wants to homebrew for Pathfinder 2nd Edition should homebrew for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I do not agree that there is no place for new content in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, like I've heard. In the time I've been with the system, 5 new classes have been playtested and 3 have come to the game. PaizoCon confirming that the Exemplar and Animus would come later in this year of 2024. And I can promise you that the many people working to write new content for the game do not know every single thing within Pathfinder 2nd Edition as individuals. So, much like them, here are the tips for creating a new class when you don't know every single thing about the game. Starting with the design philosophy of Pathfinder, I want you to pause my video and immediately go watch 1DM's video on Pathfinder 2e's design philosophy. I'm going to mirror a lot of what he says in his video in this section, with a limited amount of my own flair, but I strongly side with his explanation. I would say rule 0, balance, balance, balance. Reading again from James Griffin's article on the importance of balance, he cites the following. In game design, balance is the concept and practice of tuning a game's rules, usually with the goal of preventing any of its component systems from being ineffective or otherwise undesirable when compared to their peers. That was him citing the Wikipedia definition. But later on, he went to talk about the point buy system of 5th edition. I think that's important to talk about here. Because he says, with some preface before, I like to take this concept a step further and use point buy for character creation. Point buy is the epitome of ensuring that every character has an equal opportunity. Sure, some characters will be better optimized, but that's the player's choice. Every player had the opportunity to do so. Everyone should have a shot at playing a character they enjoy in a game that they have an equal opportunity to see succeed in. Well, at least in relation to their fellow players. Further on in 1DM's video, he kind of put this here, and when he was talking about game balance, and it's something that doesn't really have a straight answer, but I think it's something important to think about when you're going in to design something new. And this is a paraphrase. What is power level? It's not just damage output. How do you maintain balance in a game that will continue to expand for years to come? Here are the rules after Rule 0. I would say after balance, 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 the other rules for the design philosophy of Pathfinder. Player choice. A player needs to have as many balance options to choose from so that they have many good options that will all be viable in the game. There needs to be clear rulings. You have to be able to understand how a rule works without obscurity, so when a player does something that is out of the box, the guidelines are so clearly defined that even though the designers couldn't have accounted for it, the game master knows how to rule it without ambiguity. And 1DM argues realistic rulings, realism, that would be of how, for instance, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the amount of time you can breathe underwater is a lot less than it was in 1st Edition. But I think, especially if you're designing new content, the setting and the situations might be different. And in a setting with magic, sometimes there are magical solutions. So something to chew on, but I don't feel like that's a hard set design philosophy rule. He also references in his video another video on Gen Con 2019 where three of the lead developers expanded on some of the parts of Pathfinder's design philosophy. And those boil down to no redundant systems. Multi-classes, prestige classes, and archetypes all essentially did the same thing in Pathfinder 1st Edition. When it came time for 2nd Edition, it was condensed down just to the archetype system that we know today. That's what it means when it says no redundant systems. Choices matter. Sure, this applies to character creation. It should have some visible impact on the gameplay of the player, but more importantly, cost must matter. Part of the reason we have the 3-action system is so that everything has a cost. If certain things were free, you could just do them to do them, then everyone would do them because it would be mechanically ineffective to not do it. 1DM lists a wonderful example of this in his video, saying recall knowledge. If recall knowledge was a free action, everyone would recall knowledge every single turn because it would be mechanically inefficient not to. So there has to be a cost to everything. Another important part of their design philosophy was that choices matter. Or, sorry, I'm so sorry. Modularity. That the system could be easily modifiable and expandable. And an instance of this in Pathfinder 2nd Edition that's easy to follow is that traits create an infinitely expandable rule set. By having a trait-based system, you are able to put certain rules on certain features that will work across the board and can interact with one another. If you have something that, if you have a feature that says this only applies to actions with the attack trait, then even if Paizo comes in 4 years from now and adds a new attack traded action to the base core, your feature will still work with that new action. And so that's why it's important that this trait system exists, and it's an example of why Pathfinder can be a modular system. Another thing they mention is the Rumpelstiltskin principle. Naming something gives you power over it is the essential of what that means, and the proficiency system was based on this principle. Now I'm not going to go into further details on this next bit, but I'm just going to list them here. And again, I highly recommend you watch 1DM's video. because these philosophies are going to have and do have an impact on the way that the system has longevity, strategic gameplay, and the ease of learning for players. And I think 1DM goes into a more nuanced overview of what that exactly means. But you came here for classes, and so far I've talked at you about just general design philosophy, and I think that has is because of the large scope that designing a new class has. There's so much that goes into that, and you have to understand some of the core fundamentals of how Pathfinder thinks and ticks and operates in order to effectively do that. Because we're now moving on to the design philosophy section for classes. Now, these principles come from me. No one at Paizo has confirmed that this is accurate. These are opinions that have come from working within the game system for 2 years, and these are in the order you should approach and think about creating a new class, from my opinion. Distinctiveness. Each class must have a unique identity and play style that sets it apart from existing classes. The distinctiveness is achieved through unique class features, abilities, and thematic elements that define what the class represents and how it operates in the game. And I'll expand on this a little bit later when we get to the tips section. Mechanical balance. New classes are designed to be balanced with existing classes, ensuring that no single class dominates in terms of power or utility. The balance extends to combat capabilities, but also skill proficiencies and overall versatility, allowing each class to contribute effectively to the party without overshadowing others. Thematic coherence. I'm less big on thematics than my brother, who I homebrew a lot with, but I recognize just how important the thematic coherence is. You have to have a clear and coherent theme that aligns with the lore and the setting that the class belongs to, whether that be Pathfinder setting or your own setting. The class's abilities and features need to integrate with the thematic concept to ensure that it makes sense in the game's world and enriches the overall narrative. The player choice and customization is also important. New classes should offer a range of options for player customization, including class features, feats, and abilities that allow the player to tailor their characters to fit their desired playstyle and character concept within the defined concept of the class. Flexibility in character development is key to maintaining player engagement and satisfaction. And replayability, going back to the three philosophies, that longevity that you get from versatility, which of course, role versatility. While every class should have a primary role or some primary niche, it also needs to offer enough versatility to contribute in various situations. This means designing abilities that allow the class to perform well in multiple contexts, such as combat, exploration, and social interactions, as well as downtime. Downtime is something that classes sometimes have to interact with, and it's not as important as the other ones, but it is nice sometimes for a class to have something to do in downtime other than earn income. It also needs to integrate with existing systems. New classes should integrate smoothly with existing rules and mechanics of Pathfinder, ensuring that the class's abilities work harmoniously with existing game elements, such as spells, equipment, and other class features. Again, this is a situation where make sure you are trading your abilities and make sure you are trading them correctly. Traits will automatically make things sort of integrate together on their own, and integrating with the proficiency system of Pathfinder will keep you on the right track as well. Finally, once you've done all of these things, playtesting and feedback. Thorough playtesting and feedback are essential in the development of a new class. Think of how much think of how much crap Paizo gets on some of their playtested classes. However, after as much critique as they can get, the official version of the class comes to the game as a masterpiece. This process helps identify potential balance issues, unintended synergies, and areas for improvement, ensuring that the final product is as polished and well tuned for the gameplay. Finally, here are my tips for design. It's my first time writing and delivering a scripted video on YouTube, so these are some of my most helpful tips I could think of at the time of writing, but they're kind of stream of consciousness. I highly recommend also watching Swing Rippers How to Homebrew PF2e Feats Archetypes Ancestries video. The premise of the video can be expanded even beyond what it is limited to, and it's a great guide to the philosophy of getting started with new homebrew. It's a video I come back to frequently as a reminder for balance and encouragement about homebrewing in a Pathfinder 2nd edition. Going further into this, establish a core mechanic for your class. Each class in Pathfinder 2nd edition has a distinct core mechanic that defines its gameplay. For example, the Barbarian has Rage, the Summoner has its Eidolon, and the Kineticist has Impulses. The more distinct your class mechanic, the less likely it will step on another class's toes, and it will survive the ever-encroaching Paizo creation schedule. When my brother and I worked on creating a new class, we had a very distinct idea, monsters as a resource, and that has carried us through 4 complete reworks of the class in playstyle, name, and theme. And yes, Howl of the Wild still somehow managed to step on our toes slightly. Concepts can be distinct and abstract. Monsters as a resource is a distinct focus point, but it's also abstract. It's not defining exactly how they're the resource. So if your concept is not abstract, it will fall apart when you try to come up with 40 plus class feats for it. More realistically, 22, and then the standard progression class features that go not 22, definitely 40. I don't know why I said that. You have an average of maybe 4 class feats per level. You get a class feat for a martial at first level and then even levels. So that's 11 class feats in total you get to pick from. That's, yeah, 44 class feats if you assume 4 class feats per level that you get a class feat. So yeah, 44. So yeah, when you're trying to come up with 40 plus class feats for it, if your concept is not abstract, it will fall apart. However, if it isn't distinct enough, you are just making a different PF2e class or archetype, but worse. This is fine if you run into that issue where it's not distinct enough. Just make it an archetype and shrink the scope to be the purest form of what you want. If you are making a ninja, right, and so they get certain features, it makes sense for them to have some ability to get like sneak attack and things like that. I would be careful. I'm going to try very quickly. I imagine ninja's not an archetype. Who'd thunk? So yeah, you're making a ninja. You're probably going to want to use the rogue sneak attack, and archetypes sometimes steal class features. That idea of a ninja is not abstract enough to fill out an entire class portfolio by itself. So that's a situation where that's still awesome. It doesn't exist in the game, and you should bring your own vision to that, but it probably belongs more as an archetype than it belongs as a class. This is noted in Swing Ripper's video, and I want to note it here. Power level is not equal in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Class, features, and feats are greater in power than archetypes. And archetypes are greater in power than ancestries, and ancestries are greater in power than skill feats at the same level. So there are instances where an ancestry will grant you access to a skill feat or a of a lower level or higher level. There are instances where an archetype at a higher level will grant you access to a lower level class feat. And it's a similar thing with the ancestry. An ancestry granting you access to a lower level archetype feat. In that sort of way of, because class is greater than archetype is greater than ancestry is greater than skill, when they interact with one another, they need to be separated. If you are going to have an archetype that gives you a class feature, it has to give that feature later on the class would get it. This is partly from a balancing perspective, but also from an identity perspective. Some of a fighter's identity is wrapped up in reactive strike when they get it at first level. If you give another class, another archetype reactive strike at first level, it pulls away from what makes fighter special at that level. Now, come 6th level, fighter has a lot of stuff it's doing. It has a lot of identity. And so it's okay to share a little bit of reactive strike with a different class, because it's no longer taking away from what fighter can do. Use Archive of Nethys's complex search query. Especially if you are unfamiliar with how Pathfinder 2nd Edition words certain things, it is imperative that you use other feats in the game to know how to word what you are trying to say. When a stage of success, for instance, has effects of a previous stage, there's specific wording for this. An example is a critical successes effect would say, quote unquote, as success, comma, but, and then the thing that is different. You are going to look silly if you create content for Pathfinder 2nd Edition that doesn't feel like could be read in a Pathfinder 2nd Edition book, and it doesn't line up with the vernacular and syntax of Pathfinder. You also need to understand precedence and what precedence is actually allowed under a pre-existing feature. You will learn to see the fundamentals of features as you learn more about the game via reading pre-existing content. The safest way to keep something balanced is to use precedence, pre-existing content that does something similar, which identifies that Paizo is a-okay with this idea existing in their game and being accessible to players. Precedence from a feature, however, does expand further than word for word what a pre-existing feature does. Here's an example. My brother had an idea for an ancestry. He wanted them to not have eyes, but they could see the world through sound. Immediately, this made me think of two feats that could be used as precedents, and I reread them to make sure I was correct. Let me show you them now. Automatons have the constructed body feature. Your physiological needs are different than those of living creatures. You don't need to eat or drink, you don't need to sleep, but you need a daily period of rest. During this period of rest, you must enter a recuperating standby state for 2 hours, which is similar to sleeping except you are aware of your surroundings and don't take penalties for being unconscious. Much like with sleeping, if you go too long without entering your standby state, you become fatigued and can't recover until you stand by for 2 hours. The other feature, the life sense perception sense. Life sense allows a monster to sense the vital essence of living and undead creatures within the listed range. The sense can distinguish the vital energy animating living creatures and the void energy animating undead creatures, much as sight distinguishes colors. The precedence is sitting right there if you understand the fundamentals of what these features do. Primarily in this case, the automatons feature because the life sense is just a bonus to add some solidarity to the precedence. Abstract the constructed body feature as far as you can with me while maintaining what it accomplishes. This is what I get. This feature removes ration tracking and redefines the sleep mechanic for this character. Now, when I say redefine the sleep, let me go a little bit further into that. I like to think of this in terms of programming, since I am a computer engineer in the making. So if you have any experience with programming, you may be familiar with overriding. In an in any object-oriented programming language, overriding is a feature that allows a subclass or child class to provide a specific implementation of a method that is already provided by one of its superclasses or parent classes, as defined by Perl in their article on method overriding in object-oriented programming languages. So the constructed body essentially overrides sleep for automatons. When another feature within the game, isolated from automaton, refers to sleep, and then that feature is applied to an automaton, the override function takes the sleep function and passes it through the automaton's definition of sleep, hence redefining sleep. Using the precedence for redefining basic character features within the sidebar ancestry balance scope, what I mean by sidebar ancestry balance scope is the scope refers to features that would be considered balanced to give to an ancestry's baseline, otherwise known as the sidebar. We can create this Daredevil site that my brother wanted for his ancestry. Here's the current wording that I came up with, and I'm sure with time and playtesting it will be refined even further. Because I can already tell this isn't perfect. Resonant Vision. Ancestry's name have enhanced hearing abilities in comparison to other ancestries, so your hearing becomes a precise sense out to 30 feet. You don't see through light, but you still perceive the world through sound. Much like with sight, an area can be bright, low light, or filled with darkness. Except for you, this is based on how much sound can be perceived in the area. A bustling market would be bright light, and a quiet, empty room would be darkness, for example. Which is similar to sight, except you cannot perceive color or texture and are acutely aware of any object's shape. As an ancestry name, you passively emit an imperceptible sound that makes an emanating area of low light for you within 30 feet. This implementation redefines sight for this ancestry, and so when another mechanic relies on sight, it becomes redefined for this ancestry and works without any heavy lifting on the player or game master's end. And again, going back to balance, balance, balance. Now, Pathfinder 2nd Edition system can take a beating when it comes to the balance of homebrew. This is because some of the systems have been designed to handle progression within the game. Every class has a progression chassis between Martial and Spellcaster. They get their unique features, yes, but under the hood, proficiencies scale at specific levels. Bonuses and penalties never exceed 4 in Pathfinder. There are also no untyped bonuses, so that way everything is limited to those 3, and Pathfinder is able to control the scale of numbers. Most things are even further on that, most things are tied into the proficiency system, which has been masterfully crafted. If you attach your new feat to the proficiency system, it will more than likely be balanced automatically. Do not forget to trait your features. This game's modularity works because of traits. Add traits to any homebrew you make, and don't be afraid to make new traits. Just make sure they are necessary and unique, and they won't be made by Paizo later on down the line. If you homebrew something new, have a few sources of precedence you can reference to justify that homebrew's existence. Make sure you're abstracting your precedence so you aren't just reinventing the wheel, but keep it within the power bounds of the precedents that you reference. Playtest the crap out of your homebrew. Paizo uses the entire player base of their game to test their classes and turn classes that would be subpar otherwise into classes that fit well alongside the rest of the roster. You do not have access to the entire player base of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Balancing your homebrew will take longer than Paizo balancing their new content. Don't be afraid to playtest in your home game, reach out to content creators in the Pathfinder community, and post ideas on forums to get even more community feedback. In conclusion, that's all I have to say for now. Creating high quality homebrew is hard. Creating a class has a huge scope to it, so it isn't something that can be done neatly and quickly. Take your time and pray that Paizo doesn't invent your class before you do. I did my best to get what I thought were important points in this video, but I'm very much not used to producing this format of content, and I struggled to maintain consistency of thought for long periods of time. I'm sure there are many things I missed in this video that I'd love to talk about later. Hopefully I get more comfortable with this style of content, but hopefully, if nothing else, this gives some nice ground rules that can help you start homebrewing in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Everybody makes mistakes, and the more you make, the better you'll get. You have to be okay with the fact that you'll probably make some crap before you make some gold. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you in the next video.